Hello, West Covina, and welcome to our Thursday night Bible study. I'm Pastor Jillian, and this is Pastor Isai Ramirez.
Hello.
We are the associate pastors of West Covina, and very happy to be with you. If you missed JP, tell him not to actually keep up his dental appointments. You'll see him in the next batch of episodes with one or the other of us. So last week we talked through the actual coup in which Absalom took over, and he did it so cleverly. I can imagine David going there as a father, like, "Son, you're stressing me out, but I'm kind of proud of the strategy and statecraft you've learned from me over the years. I'm so proud, even as I'm so frightened."
A little bit of both, yeah.
Right. So today we pick up the story in 2 Samuel chapter 16. David's on the run. The ark has gone back to Jerusalem. And here we are. Verse 1. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. Now, some background in case you missed, like I did, the episode a couple of months ago at this point, in which we talked about Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was the son of Saul. Not the son of Saul, the son of Jonathan. He's Saul's grandson.
Yes.
The last remaining member of Jonathan's family that David wanted to show kindness to. He had broken both of his feet in the siege of the palace, and so he was lame, and David had offered kindness to him that he could eat at David's table to the end of his days. So, the friendship between Jonathan and David continued with Mephibosheth and David. So here's Mephibosheth's steward, Ziba, waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. Valuable provisions if you're on the run in a hurry.
Absolutely.
The king asked Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the desert." So this is just a very sweet, very thoughtful gesture, and it feels like something that would come from Mephibosheth. Then the king asked, "Where's your master's grandson?" Ziba said to him, "He is staying in Jerusalem because he thinks today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom." Oh, snap. So he's praying. So Ziba is taking advantage of the situation in order to get what he wants. Because Mephibosheth has a soft spot in David's heart, okay? But if Mephibosheth were, in fact, interested in taking advantage of the chaos to take back Saul's kingdom, well, then we do have a problem here, right? It preys on David's deepest insecurities. His son has already betrayed him. Will his best friend's son betray him now? So in his hasty, very Davidish anger, the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." "I humbly bow," Ziba said. "May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king." So there's a certain science fiction series where there's a certain race of people who rule by the rules of acquisition. And one of those rules of acquisition is the broader the smile, the sharper the knife. And that is totally the game that Ziba is playing here. He is winning through, not with swords, but with food and flattery. Well, it won't end well for him, but it will take a while for the text to get back to them. I love how some parts of this story are written cutting back between things, so that you feel the tension in these different storylines.
The plots.
Right?
The stories, yeah.
And because you got to remember, this stuff was transmitted verbally and by hand. This isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. It's not like they can go back and easily word processor insert stuff after the fact. So the way they managed to build tension in biblical stories is absolutely amazing. So, verse 5, as King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family, man, he's seeing all his ghosts today, came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. As he cursed, Shimei said, "Get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel! The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord whose place you have reigned. The Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a man of blood." Woo, that's harsh. So Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." So it actually was a capital offense to, assault the king and curse him out.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's generally not a good thing if someone did the exact same thing to our president. Yeah. And it doesn't matter which president it is. Come to think of it, no. We'll still have our same president when this airs. We won't have the same one for very long. Wait, does this one air on election day? Yes! This airs on election day.
So we'll see.
Never mind these bird walks. But any president,
yes,
loved or hated, if someone started throwing dirt at them and cussing them out at a rally or something,
right,
there'd be consequences, right? Because you just don't do that if you value the stability of the nation.
Yes.
So Abishai, son of Zeruiah, is all like, "Let's go cut off his head." But the king said, "What do you and I have in common, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, 'Curse David,' who can ask, 'Why do you do this?'" So the king is having an interesting moment of low self-esteem, or humility, depending on how you look at it. He is in a certain headspace where he can see it totally being within the will of God for Shimei to be verbally abusing him like this. And he very well may be thinking that, wow, he's paying for what he did to Saul's family. Now, this whole matter has very little to do with what he did to Saul's family. We went over this at length when we were in those chapters, but David was nothing if not incredibly fair to Saul's family, perhaps excessively fair to Saul's family, maybe even a little too merciful to Saul's family. This is all about Bathsheba, Tamar, and crimes against, women.
Right.
Yes. It's an entirely different set of problems, but Saul's family is using the opportunity to air their grievances.
Yeah.
It's interesting how when one bad thing happens, other people have a way of ripping it open and sneaking their own stuff in and going, "Oh, and remember this," even if this is not related to the issue at hand. It's sort of like something they talk about in couples counseling, or rather, at the very least, in terms of fair fighting. I've never been to couples counseling. Maybe I should go sometime. But what I read in marriage counseling books is that one of the most vital skills in keeping a relationship together is learning how to fight fair. Now, there's several rules to fighting fair. No name calling. One thing that's supposed to be off limits is that the fight should be about the thing at hand. You can tell the difference between a fair fight and a quickly degenerating, maybe you two need some space fight, by whether or not you start digging into archaeology and stuff from 10 years ago.
Yep, that's true.
A fight is supposed to be, a fair fight is supposed to be about learning to understand each other, pushing back on boundaries that might have been, trampled on in the course of living life. It happens in every relationship, personal or professional, and just, arriving at a better way of doing things. But when you start digging into the past, oh my goodness, you're just trying to hurt them at that point.
Absolutely. That's I think at that point that's the the motive just becomes about winning the arguments, about who can dig up the most, how can I hurt you the most, how can I say the things that will offend you enough so that I come out on top, so that I come out victorious. But it's not really about the motive of the argument. Becomes less about seeing eye to eye, seeing each other's side.
Yeah. And Shimei here is literally digging up the past here, because he is pelting him with dirt. So David then said to Abishai and all his officials, "My son, who is of my own flesh, is trying to take my life. How much more than this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing I am receiving today." You could almost see David having a bit of a sense of humor about it, like, my own son hates me. Why shouldn't this guy hate me? Maybe if I put up with enough garbage, God will reward me for it. Which also shows to some of maybe David's negative headspace at this moment, because sometimes we all get into a mode where we think we're just playing the suffering Olympics.
Yes.
And if we just suffer a little more, maybe the rest of our suffering will go away. That's emotional logic. That's not how God works.
If I suffer enough, then maybe, even if we don't believe in it, we think that this like sort of karmic balance good will come our way if we just allow the bad to happen and put up with it. Yep.
So, verse 13, David and his men continued along the road while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, probably emotionally as well as physically, and there he refreshed himself. Now, interesting tangent here. Shimei is the name given if you go all the way up to the book of Esther, okay? Esther may be named after Esther, Hadassah, but Esther would not have been able to make her courageous stand before Xerxes if she had not been taught the proper lessons by her cousin Mordecai. Now, Mordecai is listed as being a descendant of Shimei from the tribe of Benjamin. It may be the same Shimei, it may not be, but if it is, look at what David's mercy accomplished here. David's mercy in sparing Saul, the Benjamite, and in sparing also Shimei. So, just as Saul spared someone he wasn't supposed to, who later on in the book of Esther became Haman the Agagite, led to Haman the Agagite, here, David's mercy spared the right person who helped set the stage to save all Israel. It's interesting how seemingly small acts of kindness can sway so much down the road. So, meanwhile, verse 15. Gotta strap in, we're covering a lot today. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushai the Archite, David's friend, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" This is David's spy, remember? This is something that actually we talked about in the last episode. Hushai the Archite came to David in hiding, was all like, "What should I do to help things most?" And David said, "Go, thwart Ahithophel's advice." Ahithophel is like everyone's prized tactician and thinker. Some of you out there will get this reference. He's their mentat. You got the reference? Amazing. So this is the biggest thing they're up against, okay? Absalom on his own is, very handsome and very charming, but it takes actual brains to succeed in this thing, and Ahithophel's their brain, and Ahithophel has a chip on his shoulder because David fooled around with his granddaughter, and here we are. So this is like one of David's number one priorities. Yeah. Just get Ahithophel's advice out of the way, if you can. So here we have Hushai shows up and says, "Hey, long live the king." So verse 17, Absalom asked Hushai, "Is this the love you show your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend?" Because everyone knows that Hushai and David are friends, you know. Hushai said to Absalom, "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the son? Just as I served your father, so I will serve you." So he's laying actually what's a pretty reasonable case.
Good logic. Yeah.
You know, as they say in the White House, we serve at the pleasure. It is about, he's the case he's saying to be trusted is, I serve the office, not the person. Which is,
Fair.
it kind of bothers me that this, which I consider a very important doctrine of keeping certain things going well, is being used as a pretense for spy work.
Yeah.
This bothers me. This bothers me deeply, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So, pardon me. Take a sip here. Hushai said to Absalom, okay, no, we did that already. Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" Well, Ahithophel answered.
Ooh, boy.
And here we get into some wild stuff. Just wild stuff. Cover your little one's ears. "Lie with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench in your father's nostrils, and the hands of everyone with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he lay with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Take a cleansing breath out there.
My goodness.
So, something that I heard recently is that this may have actually been less shocking to its original audience than it is to us. Because let's not mince words. What Ahithophel here is recommending and what Absalom is doing is rape. It just is. Let's not mince words. That's what it is. And it's kind of disturbing that Ahithophel would recommend this when his whole chip on the shoulder is the violation of his granddaughter Bathsheba. And it's also angry making that that Absalom goes with this, even though his original beef with David is the rape of his sister Tamar.
Exactly, yeah.
So what this tells me is that these men have gone from having an actual moral high ground. We may not like them, they may not be God's chosen people, but they had a point up to this point. But at this point, they lose what Dr. Martin Luther King called moral authority. Moral authority is where your method is where instead of fighting via swords, instead of fighting via bombs, you're fighting with the strength of your own character. And it's a very powerful form of authority. Yeah. And here, up to this point, Absalom had it. He was avenging his sister. He was taking down a rapist. He was listening to the people's concerns. Up to this point, to people other than David, who's just kind of interested in staying alive. Fair. Absalom looks like he could perhaps be a decent king, but now he's lost the moral high ground.
Yes.
Where this might have been a slightly less shocking to its original audience is that apparently, I'd have to find more of a source on this than the commentary I've been listening to, which, if you've been listening to me throughout this series, I have mixed feelings about the commentary I've been listening to. I want to find a better one for whatever we're working through next year. More on that later. If we do the book I'm thinking we're going to do, I already have a better commentary than this one. But it's quite possible that this was simply a way of saying I've taken the throne and everything that comes with it. I'm taking possession of these women because these women are a part of what it means to have the throne. Very crass,
Yeah.
very ugly, and not a shining mark on how that would be how property is viewed. Now, where I see a flaw in this argument is, did we catch David? Well, okay, maybe Zeruiah. Never mind. Moving right along. Sorry, you're giving me a look.
Oh, no. But I also think of, like, this is also... these are concubines and women that have become sort of David's, like, over his reign and his time and power, that has become his, like...
Household managers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I highly doubt
so
that this is one of his named wives, like
right, yeah.
Bathsheba or Abigail, you know.
And I think it also does go to say, even though the king of Israel has multiple wives, it also is clearly was never part of God's plan for him to, to have concubines, to live this kind of lifestyle. But it has led to this, to this sort of debauchery.
Yeah. So verse 23. Now in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. Whoo! Famous wise man. So, Ahithophel gives another piece of advice. Like, Pastor Jillian, why are you continuing to chapter 17? Because it all flows together and it would be artificial to break it up here. I will try not to keep us too ridiculously long. So, Ahithophel said to Absalom, I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed, and this plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. It is a good plan. David is tired because Shimei has been throwing dirt and cursing at him all day.
Yeah.
It's also a good thing because it would cut down civilian damage. And so you get the sense that this guy is very experienced in solving all kinds of problems. But Absalom said, summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say. So when Hushai came to him, Absalom said, Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion. Hushai said to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel has given is not good this time. Oh, it was actually a good plan.
Yeah.
But what he says has some truth to it, which is why I think Absalom follows it. You know your father and his men. They are fighters, and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, there has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter, and that those with him are brave. He's basically, reminding Absalom, your dad hid in the wilderness for years before he became king.
He's experienced. He's a man of war. He knows.
And he's not wrong. He really isn't. So here's his advice. Verse 11, so I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, be gathered to you, with you yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it down to the valley until not even a piece of it can be found. So, basically, he's saying that we need to wait for him to find his hiding place and then go smoke him out there so that you don't have an early defeat and have deserting soldiers. Now, it seems plain to me that Ahithophel's advice is better, But that's because we actually know how exhausted David is. We know what David's been doing all day.
We see that side of the story, yeah.
Yeah, we see that side of the story. We know how tired David is.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But perhaps to Absalom sitting there and not having actually hung out with his father in a while.
That's true, yeah. I haven't seen him, yeah.
And maybe seeing him as the younger man who was a little bit more ready to run and hide, might find Hushai's advice better. So, Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel." For the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. What I find really interesting about this is that good advice can be frustrated by God, even though it's actually good advice, because it doesn't suit God's purposes. It's like wisdom and intelligence are what they are. And we'll often cough up the right answer, even if they're not for the right purpose. Even if they're not for the right purpose. So I think that's where we get into the end of Ecclesiastes. Talks about how the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Yes.
The beginning and the end of wisdom. Because while wisdom and intelligence on their own can do a lot of really impressive things, only God can channel them towards the right goals.
Right. Yeah, that's so good.
So, verse 15. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar the priests, "Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised them to do so and so. Now send a message immediately and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the desert. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up." He just bought David time. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel. A servant girl was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left quickly and went to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. Now it's starting to feel like one of those weird B plots in the Greatest Adventure Bible stories. Do you remember those?
Oh, I love those.
You know, Derek, Margot, and Moki? Is Moki his name?
Yeah, I think so, Moki.
Something like that. They have all these silly B plots that have to do with spying and stuff.
Yeah.
And this is starting to feel like one of those. They climbed into this well. Yeah. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" The woman answered them, "They crossed over the brook." The men searched but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After the men had gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, "Set out and cross the river right now. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you." So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. Good for him! He got out. So when Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. Now this is really tragic for specifically interesting reasons. This is a man who basically seems to see his worth in terms of either his wisdom or the respect that it gains. Intelligence and wisdom are not a bad thing. There have been times when people have tried to say that there is a real, strong division between faith and reason. But the reality is that both faith and reason require each other to be internally coherent. There is no faith without reason, and there is no reason without faith. And I could go on a really, really long tangent about how much faith any kind of reason requires, and we could talk about axioms and worldviews. But here's a man who prizes his intelligence, and the minute that it's not followed, he loses his will to live. Intelligence is good, but it is not something to build a person's entire self-concept around. I grew up with a great many intelligent people. In many ways, my high school experience was surreal because I went to school with so many prodigies. And I wasn't even at like a school that billed itself as being for the gifted and talented. There just happened to be a cello prodigy, a ballet prodigy, someone training for the Olympics in speed skating. Oh, where does it stop? A violin prodigy, several dancers. Yeah, this is an Adventist school, and we had several dancers in training. Someone who went on to win the National Merit Scholarship. No, more than one who did that. Just all concentrated in this very, very small school that topped out at maybe 120, 125 in the high school at its peak. And in communities where intelligence is highly prized, it can be tempting to see yourself purely in how you measure against however that is seen, whether it's grades or musical ability or whatever. But that's not how we're meant to live. That's not how we're meant to live. Intelligence is good because it can help improve your quality of life. It can help you solve problems. It can do a lot of great things. But it's not the only thing that matters in life. The fact that that his will to live crumbles so quickly, the moment that he is no longer honored like that, shows me that he built his house on the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's like you said earlier, Ecclesiastes, the beginning and end of wisdom is knowing God. It just reminds me again. Ecclesiastes as well. It's all vanity. If it's just staking his own self-esteem, his own self-worth, self-view on just even his reputation, on his on how he is perceived, on how his wisdom is even received, then that vanity, it's not lasting. It doesn't last. Like in Ecclesiastes, he says it's like chasing the wind.
Yeah. So this is just tragic, and it just hits me right here because I've known so many very smart people, some of whom had their foundation in the right place and flourished like a tree that's planted by the waters, and some who, despite their vast intelligence, were deeply miserable because they never found that good foundation. That's not where this chapter ends, unfortunately, even though I feel like that's a good place for it. Verse 24, there's just a few things to tie up here. David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel in hot pursuit. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Jether, an Israelite who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. So, all in the family. You know, sometimes families have specific specialties that they all grow stronger in over time. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi son of Nahash from Reba of the Ammonites, and Makir son of Amiel from Lo-debar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rohelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, "The people have become hungry and tired and thirsty in the desert." I'm kind of glad, actually, that it ends on this note of mercy towards David and his men.
Yeah.
Perhaps because some gifts like intelligence are so highly prized, sometimes those simple life-giving things are not. But when you're in the wilderness and you have nothing, What you really need is someone. You don't have to be smart to give someone who's hungry a good meal.
Right.
You don't have to be. As a friend of mine said to me recently when I was stressing out over my housework on my day off yesterday, it's not that deep, bro. Just wash one dish and make sure and throw something for your kid to eat on it. And at the end of the day, when you get past all the layers of conniving and strategizing and politicking that we see in these chapters, what really sticks out is people's kindness.
Yes.
And how kindness just turns the tide everywhere you see it. We see kindness turn the tide with Ittai, the Gittite. We see kindness manipulate David, the false kindness of Ziba.
Yes.
We see kindness save the lives of the messengers to David and ultimately save David's life. And we see this kindness at the end that preserves their life. Kindness may not be as flashy as some of the other gifts, but it is more important. The other gifts are useful, but ultimately they are for the sake of kindness. Will you pray us out?
Yes, absolutely. Father in heaven, God, thank you for these stories that we can read, study, and learn from, and see the lessons that you have for us. Help us to represent you in our relationships with others. Help us to see how important it is also for us to build our faith in you, to build our self-view, our relationships, the way we see the world with you at the center, Lord. Help us to be influenced by that alone, and not by any other selfish motives or even misunderstandings, Lord. But help us to be influenced by you in the way that we continue to interact with others and in the world around us. Lord, we love you. We thank you for who you are. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
Amen.